So welcome everyone to the Lakota Wisdom Series. This is episode 4 of 5, The Truth About Thanksgiving. And I won't give too much context except that many of us, when we were in school, learned about the Mayflower and pilgrims and things like that. And it's the history of it is so much more rich than that. And not always positive and happy feeling and things of that nature. So I've asked Joseph to talk about this in a more full scope. But first, I'm going to introduce him. Then I will do a brief meditation to ground you all in the space and bring your communities into this space and introduce you through meditation. And then I will ask Jackie to do a brief search inside yourself meditation for about 2 minutes. Sound good, everybody?
That sounds wonderful.
Great.
Okay. Our guest, Joseph Marshall III, was born and raised on the Rosebud Sioux Reservation and holds a PhD from the Reservation University, which he helped establish. He's a storyteller, a historian, an award-winning author of 18 books. I found out today he has 9 children, which is just fascinating to me. He also wrote Crazy Horse Weeps, The Lakota Way, and The Journey of Crazy Horse. His first language is Lakota, and he handcrafts primitive Lakota bows and arrows, which we talked about last session. So if you'd like to learn about how he crafts handmade bows, you can go to the YouTube channel and review it there, and he sells them. So if you'd like to order a custom-made one, you can do that with him directly. He's a specialist in wilderness survival, and I've asked him to join us for 5 sessions, and he's been so generous to do that with us. So I'm always really excited for these calls. It's so nourishing on my heart and soul to be here and to have you all join me and join us in this space. So I'm going to ask you to close your eyes and to take 3 deep breaths. While keeping your eyes closed, even though we are in a virtual space, I ask that you feel the energy of each person here. We have Joseph that brings generations of Lakota people into these calls. We have David Bruner, who brings an entire congregation of the Center for Spiritual Living into every conversation he's in. We have Samantha Vax, who studies astrology and teaches people how to come home to themselves. And we have Jackie Tor, who is a search inside yourself meditation teacher, as well as a previous school teacher that taught dance, and a previous client of mine. Each of you bring your communities into this space. As you feel each other in here, I want you to root down the walls, into the floor of your building, all the way until you get into the ground, into the earth. I want you to feel your connection into the earth. 2 feet into the earth. 5 feet into the earth. 20 feet into the earth. And as you push your roots down, let your roots and all the communities that are behind you feed into the roots of the people here now, and push your nutrients from yourself and your communities into the others here with us. Feel the giving of that. Now notice the opposite, the receiving. The receiving from each person on this call, pushing their nutrients and their communities into you and yours. Feel the strength of your roots and the interconnection of this space. Sit up a little taller, a little stronger. Take a couple deep breaths here. Begin to flutter your eyes open, slowly, gently. Jackie, will you do a very brief 1 to 2 minute search inside yourself meditation with us?
Thing. Great. So this is what we call the body scan. And I will invite you to find a position that's both alert and relaxed. You could be sitting, seated, lying down, whichever way feels best for you in your body. And if you'd like to close the eyes or gaze slightly downward, the invitation exists for that too. And we're just going to start by scanning from the inside out, noticing if there's any sensation, lack of sensation, differences in temperature, differences in pressure. It's all welcome. The goal is not to change anything, just to notice. And so we'll start with the crown of the head. Scanning the inside of the head. Moving down into our jaw and chin and neck. And even farther down into our shoulders. Really sensing our width here. Where do our edges begin and end? And down into our chest and our upper arms. And farther down into our abdomen, our pelvis, our lower arms, our seat. Really noticing where it is that we contact a surface and what that place where two different constitutions, so to speak, meet. Moving down into our thighs and our knees. Our calves. And our feet. And before we bring this practice to a close, we're going to lengthen in length, in width, in depth, and in purpose. So if you can just put a little bit more space between each vertebrae, even if it's a millimeter, kind of stretching up, really sitting or standing tall with dignity, and then lengthen into your width. So really taking up one's rightful place without overextending, without shrinking. And then really feeling and lengthening into our depth. So our front and our back, the space in between, where our vision for the future meets our past. It has its hand on our back. And lastly, our intention. So asking, what's most important right now? And we'll complete this practice with 2 breaths in and out on your own time, and returning to our mutual virtual space.
Thank you, Jackie. I'm so very grateful and kind of like a kid on Christmas morning to have you all here. It's so great. So I would like to have our three our 3 audience members to just briefly introduce yourself for about 30 seconds, and then we're going to turn the rest of the floor over to Joseph, and we will leave about 15 minutes or so at the end where you can share what impacted you, what you appreciated, or any questions you may have for him at the end. So we'll go in this order. We'll go David, Sam, and Jackie.
Hello, everyone. It's good to be here with you today. Hello, Joseph and Jackie, Samantha. Hi, Christina. I'm currently in Mexico, so I'm in the presence of a native community here in Jalisco, and I'm the senior minister and the spiritual director at Center for Spiritual Living in San Jose. And I find it delightful to be in the presence of people who are exploring who we really are as that unrolls. So thank you very much for allowing me to participate.
Thank you. Okay. Hello, good morning, good midday, good evening. How is everybody? I'm sending you guys all beautiful healing vibrations and positive energy. I'm Samantha Vax, otherwise known as the Earth Mother, and I am an astrological life coach. I've been studying astrology for over 9 years, and my goal and purpose in life is to be able to have the goal of everyone reaching that abundance mindset where we're able to re-identify and be able to rejuvenate or reactivate those parts that we sometimes neglect or don't give enough attention to. So it's really about unconditional love and being able to understand yourself on a deeper level. I love what I do. I'm passionate about what I do, and I'm really grateful and thankful and honored to be able to be in this space with you guys and to share the beautiful energy that we have here. We've got a lot of great souls in this chat room, and I'm really excited to deep dive and explore further with you guys. So thank you for having me.
Thank you.
Hi, everyone. Hi, Christina. It's wonderful to be here with you all. My name is Jackie Tour, and I am a Search Inside Yourself teacher. And I, for many years, worked in the public education system here in San Francisco, primarily in underserved communities. And I'm delighted to be here and to be able to share time and space with you all. So thank you for having me.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, everyone. Joseph, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thanks for you and Jackie doing the meditation. I was reminded of what my grandparents, my maternal grandparents who raised me, they had their little rituals. It wasn't a daily thing, but it was a frequent thing. My grandmother would sit alone and meditate, and I assume she was meditating. She would go out by herself, either out in the yard or in the house somewhere, and just spend a few minutes of just in silence with her head bowed, and sometimes she said she was praying, sometimes she said she was just thinking and meditating. So that was her frequent routine. My grandfather, on the other hand, sort of did the same thing, but he would do an interesting thing where he would go outside and he would perform this set of movements with a long, about a 6 foot long pole. And what he was doing was going through the movements that a Lakota warrior at one time would use in fighting with a lance. But it wasn't, he was just mimicking the movements because he said it helped him flex his body and then put him in a good mood and sort of connect him with people, his ancestors and his family. And an interesting part of that was that he was doing a ritual that has been lost. It was sort of a kata. It was like if you are into taekwondo or karate, there are movements called kata where you do these offensive and defensive move in slow motion. And that's what he was doing, mimicking the moves of a Lakota warrior using a lance. And those were their rituals that they would do frequently. But the one thing that they would do that I still do every now and then is that when the weather was good, obviously, they would go out and would take off their shoes and they would walk barefoot on the grass, on the sand, on the ground, whatever, to reconnect with the earth. And that was one thing. They did all of the things just to reconnect and to center themselves. So I was reminded of that during meditation. So thanks for being here. And the topic for today is the truth behind Thanksgiving, the holiday. And we could spend hours and hours talking about the historical implications and certainly the history of it and the colonization of North America, because that's really where it started. And it's brought us to this day where now in the last, especially 10 or so years, Native people have really been pushing to tell the real story of Thanksgiving, or at least to give up the myth that has become at the back of why we observe this holiday. So I'm going to start off by reading small portions of from an article that I ran across, and it was written by a woman named Claire Bugos, and she's associated with the Smithsonian Institute. Her last name is spelled Bugos. And she wrote an article about a year ago. And in that article, she interviewed an author of a book. And the author's name is David Silverman. And the name of his book is This Land is Their Land: The Wampanoag Indians, Plymouth Colony, and the Troubled History of Thanksgiving. I haven't read the book, but I have read this article, and it touches on, it talks about, the basis for the real history, what should be the real history of Thanksgiving. And the title of the article is The Myths of the Thanksgiving Story and the Lasting Damage They Imbue. And the subtitle is, In Truth, Massacres, Disease, and American Indian tribal politics are what shaped the Pilgrim Indian Alliance at the root of the holiday. So let me, to set the foundation for our discussion, let me read you two small paragraphs from this article. In Thanksgiving pageants held at schools across the United States, children don headdresses colored with craft store feathers and share tables with classmates wearing black construction paper hats. It's a tradition that pulls on a history passed down through the generations of what happened in Plymouth. Local Native Americans welcomed the courageous, pioneering pilgrims to a celebratory feast. But as David Silverman writes in his new book, much of that story is a myth, riddled with historical inaccuracies. Beyond that, Silverman argues that the telling and retelling of those falsehoods is deeply harmful to the Wampanoag Indians, whose lives and society were forever damaged after the English arrived in Plymouth. And I can recall when I was in elementary school, a couple of times where I was tabbed to play the part of one of those Indians in a Thanksgiving pageant, where I had to be on stage and raise my hand in greeting to the pilgrims and welcome them and so forth. And then, of course, partaking of the Thanksgiving feast and smoking a peace pipe and all that kind of stuff. And little did I know at that age, as fourth and fifth grader, that what I was acting out was nowhere near the truth. So in this article by Ms. Bugos, Claire, there was one question she asked, and there were several questions she asked, but one of them sort of gets to the heart of what I'm talking about at the moment. She asked the question, what is the Thanksgiving myth? And Mr. Silverman's reply was this: the myth is that friendly Indians, unidentified by tribe, welcomed the pilgrims to America, teach them how to live in this new place, sit down to a dinner with them, and then disappear. They hand off America to white people so they can create a great nation dedicated to liberty, opportunity, and Christianity for the rest of the world to profit. That's the story. It's about Native people conceding to colonialism. It's bloodless and in many ways an extension of the ideology of manifest destiny. And it's depending on how we learned our history or where we learned our history or how much we're into history, we all heard the term manifest destiny, that white people were destined to come to this continent and to conquer it, as it were, and bring civilization to this uncivilized land. And the Thanksgiving story is very bloodless. doesn't talk about the interaction between the early pilgrims and the Wampanoags and other native groups who were around at that time. In truth, as the subtitle of the articles says, there were massacres and there was disease. And those things had a direct impact on the Wampanoag at that time in 1620 and the other native groups that were in the area. And then it didn't end there, obviously. It came west. That sort of the conquering mentality, the colonizing of a continent, that came west. And it affected my people as well, the Lakota. And we were on the north central plains in what is now the state of South Dakota. So as school kids, as a school child, as being in elementary school, I remember learning about this in history class. I remember being fed this myth that you know the native people in this place called Plymouth sat down to a feast with the white people, the pilgrims, because they had reached an alliance and because they were good to one another. It never talked about what really happened. And it wasn't until, as a young adult, I began to learn piece by piece the real history of Thanksgiving. And there really was no Thanksgiving as such, the way we celebrate it today and the way we think of it today. None of that happened. So what does this mean? It means that there's a lot of myth, there are a lot of misstatements, there's a lot of misconception, there's a lot of misinterpretation of what exactly happened between Europeans and later Euro-Americans and the indigenous peoples of Turtle Island, which became North America. And we're continually fed those bloodless myths, generation after generation after generation. And it speaks to the mindset of European and Euro-American historians that they, as the conquering heroes, so to speak, brought civilization and goodness to this land infested with savages and so forth. So I think that if we at least decide in our own minds, no matter who we are, no matter which side of the story we're on, because we are on one side or the other, unavoidably, we need to decide that we debunk the myths, we separate ourselves from the myths, and learn about the real interaction between Europeans and Americans. And I said, we can dwell on that. We can dwell on that for hours and hours and hours. But that's not the whole point. The point I want to make is that there is a real story. And the real story is not pretty. It's really, really ugly. And it all depends on how much initiative, how much courage that you have as a non-native to learn the story. And it's not an easy story to learn. But again, I'm sure that this year, as in other years, there will be pageants in schools. Maybe not so much this year because of the pandemic, but there will continue to be those pageants that reinforce that myth to the detriment of what's real. And so all of those pageants being repeated keep validating that myth. It's like validating George Washington never telling a lie after he cut down the cherry tree, when he says, I can never tell a lie, I was the one that cut down the cherry tree. Or the myth that he threw a coin across the Potomac River or some river. So all of those myths keep, are validated time and time again when they're told as truth, when they're presented as truth. But there is, some of us natives do celebrate Thanksgiving, not because we're observing that holiday that is rooted in mythology, in a myth, but because Thanksgiving, or the state of being thankful or appreciative, was part of our cultures long before the idea of the United States of America was a twinkle in anybody's eye. And keep in mind, there are still, fortunately, perhaps as many as 800 different ethnically identifiable native groups, indigenous groups in this country, and on this continent, including Canada and the United States and Mexico and Central America. In the United States, there are probably 600, a little bit more than 600 ethnically identifiable tribes. And you probably heard that there is a group of us who are what is called federally recognized by the federal government of the United States as tribes, as nations, as indigenous nations. And that recognition came from either us entering into treaties with the United States federal government or by executive order. And so it's sort of, to me, a dubious title of federally recognized, because it means that white people gave us the status of being a native tribe. And I don't personally buy into that at all. So among us that are still here, all of the different indigenous nations that are still here, many of us in our cultures, and I can speak directly from the Lakota culture, that Thanksgiving or being grateful or being appreciative was a very important part of our culture. Especially when something momentous occurred, or say, for example, during a year after someone's passing, we remember them at a Thanksgiving feast. It's called a releasing of the spirit. We have a feast and we have a ceremony, and we give thanks for that person's life that was here. And so we enter into this, we conduct these ceremonies, and then we sit down together and we eat. And sometimes in a situation where a family is remembering a loved one who has passed, it's a memorial feast. And in honor of that person, and in thankfulness for people being there with them in their time of grief, they offer a meal. Sometimes it's to dozens of people, sometimes it's to hundreds of people. And then they pass out gifts to show their gratefulness, to show their appreciation, to show their being thankful that their families and their communities came to them and helped them in their times of grief. And so there are a lot of reasons for us to be sort of, having this idea of being grateful and being thankful as part of our culture. And it's still that way to this day. But some of us observe the holiday, but not for the, as I said, not for the reasons that most of this country will. And we just use it as a time for us, our families, to get together and tell stories about our ancestors and just share a meal and be a family. There were also healing ceremonies that we do, especially among the Lakota, and I'm sure there are various kinds of healing ceremonies among other tribes as well. And the healing ceremonies is where a family or an individual will approach a healer, the medicine man, as you probably all know him or know them. And it could be a woman as well, where there is a situation where somebody wants relief from, be it an illness or some kind of situation that is dire. And so a ceremony is conducted. The medicine man and the people who come to the ceremony pray for that individual or that family to be relieved of the illness or that circumstance. And it's a long ceremony. It lasts for 2 or 3 hours. And after the ceremony is concluded, and the medicine man prays and other people pray for the family or the individual, there is a meal. And that meal is provided by the people who ask for the ceremony, the people who have some kind of affliction or situation they want relief from. They're the ones who provide the meal. And so we sit down together, all of us who have been to that ceremony, in thanksgiving for having had the opportunity to go through the ceremony and to pray for these people and to have their situation or their illness mitigated. So being thankful is a part of who we are as Native people. Unfortunately, as far as the Lakota were concerned, once the missionaries, Christian missionaries came among us, and they directly denigrated our beliefs, a lot of those ceremonies were sort of went underground. They still occurred, but away from prying eyes. So thankfully, some of those are still passed on, and we still do them. So, you know, personally, during this time of Thanksgiving, which again, I reiterate, had nothing to do with the historical Thanksgiving. And I think it was Abraham Lincoln that sort of designated as such during the Civil War. And it's been observed ever since. Personally, I'm grateful for a lot of things. One of the things I'm grateful for, just off the top of my head, is that I'm grateful that I had the honor of marrying the love of my life. I'm grateful for my children, and certainly my grandchildren. And I don't know how many there are exactly, somewhere between 12 and 16, I think. But I'm grateful for all of them. I know some of them. I know some of them well. I know some of them not as well. And you know, I'm sad, obviously, because, you know, 7 years ago, I lost my wife to cancer. So there is that is there. It's like the 800-pound elephant. But I'm grateful that I was able to share my life with her and she with me. And all the experiences that we have together are basis for my appreciation and my gratefulness. And it's not just during Thanksgiving that I think about those things, but all the time. And I'm reminded of an axiom that somebody wrote on a card and sent it to me after she passed. It's a very simple axiom. And I don't know where it started. It's anonymous, but I'm sure, you know, somebody wrote it from the standpoint of personal experience. And the axiom is this: death leaves a heartache no one can heal. Love leaves a memory no one can steal. And it's during these times like this discussion that we're having that I'm reminded of all of those things, and that there are things for all of us to be grateful for in our lives, even for the bad experiences, even for the negativity, even for anything that teaches us a lesson. And you know, we all go through that in our lives. We have good experiences and bad experiences, to generalize it. And I know that all of you have walked that road. But you know, we're still here at this moment because of the good experiences, and in spite of the bad. We're here at this moment sharing this discussion. So to me, that's something to be grateful for, to have the opportunity to have this moment and to learn from one another. And that's what life is all about. And obviously, the whole world is going through this really crappy time. There's no turning away from it. There's no avoiding it. It's all over the place. It's over TV, it's in the news, it's on Facebook, it's on all the social platforms. It's out there because it's real. And sometimes we feel helpless because our leaders aren't doing enough, or they're doing the wrong things. And the leaders that are doing the right things are very small voices. I'm here in New Mexico, and our governor, Michelle Lujan Grisham, is doing everything she can to mitigate it. She's again imposed a 2-week lockdown. She, right from the beginning, she was talking about ways in which she wanted us to buy into mitigating this pandemic. And it hasn't worked, because now it's spiking again. The number of positive tests is spiking, and the number of deaths is growing up. But we don't have the numbers that, say, a place like New York or California does, but it's still a bad situation. And I'm from South Dakota, and I was there over the summer, and at the current time, it's spiking. They're experiencing rates that are really, really high. And unlike the governor of New Mexico here, the governor of South Dakota is totally ignoring the situation. It's like, well, you know, if we ignore it long enough, it'll go away. And she's not imposing any kind, she's not suggesting any kind of positive approach to this pandemic in the state of South Dakota. So there are two opposing ways to deal with it. So we, you know, regardless of what our so-called leaders say, or regardless of what anybody says, I think it behooves us as individuals to do whatever we can during this time. And it comes down to that. It comes down to whether or not we really care about each other. That's what it's all about. That's really where it's at for me. I don't know about you, but that's where it's at for me. And I say that because even in the worst of times, there's something that is positive. There's something to be grateful for. And being grateful, being in that state of gratefulness, to me, in my life, in my experiences, can lead to a state of grace, or a state of being in balance with everything around you. Now, being in a state of grace or being in a state of balance isn't going to help us solve everything. It's not a magic wand. But it gives us the wherewithal, it gives us the strength, if you will, to face and confront what is there in our world today that we're sharing as citizens of this planet. So in order for us to do that, I'm going to tell you a story of an aspect of my culture, the Lakota culture, that I learned about when I was a young man. And it's a story, it's about a ceremony or a ritual that took place, and the last time it happened was, as far as we know, it happened in 1865. And the man that I wrote about, Crazy Horse, was part of that ritual. It was a ritual in the Lakota communities to pick young men who were of good character. And by young men, I mean young men in their 20s and so forth, who were of good character, who were virtuous, and they were given or offered the gifts of a shirt. And that shirt wasn't like anything like the one I'm wearing now, but it was made out of 4 bighorn sheep hides, one in the front, one in the back, and the 2 sleeves that comprised the 4 hides. And the shirts were elaborately decorated with dyed porcupine quills and hair from the female members of the family. It wasn't a war shirt like it's erroneously stated. It was just a shirt to depict the character of the person it was made for. And those shirts were offered to those individuals who were picked because of their character and their virtuousness and their goodness. They were asked to be shirt men, to epitomize the best of the community, the best values, the best norms, the best characters of the community. And they were given an awesome responsibility. They were asked, after they accepted the shirts, they were asked to live their lives as positive examples for everybody else. In other words, to live a life beyond reproach, to epitomize the best of Lakota society. Do you think everyone who was offered the shirt accepted it? No, because they realized what it meant, that they had to be above reproach. They had to make as few mistakes as possible. They had to be an example for everybody else, every second of their lives. And some of the young men realized the kind of responsibility that meant, and they said, no, thank you. I don't want that responsibility. And some did. Crazy Horse, who's from Walla Lakota, turned down his shirt. He said, no, I don't want that notoriety. I don't want that, whatever it is, the responsibility that came with it. but his father talked him into accepting the shirt. And there was a ritual that went with the shirt. The whole community came together, sometimes whole villages came together, and those young men were put in the center, and they were feasted, they were celebrated, and people gave speeches. And at the end, a very old person, man or woman, got up and they reminded these young men what they had let themselves in for. And this is what they said to those young men. And obviously this is in English, but the meaning is still the same. So this is the charge, each one of those shirt men. To wear the shirts, you must be a man above all others. Not being better than others, but living a good life. You must help others before you think of yourselves. Help the widows and those who have little to wear and to eat and have no one to speak for them. Do not look down on others or see those who look down on you. And do not let anger guide your mind or your heart. Be generous, be wise, and show fortitude, so that the people can follow what you do and then what you say. Above all, have courage and always be the first to charge the enemy. I think if I heard these words back then, I would have said, no, thank you. I don't want that responsibility. But let's stop and think about these words for a minute. These are things we can incorporate, each of us, no matter who we are, no matter what our culture is, no matter what our spiritual, religious beliefs are. We can incorporate these into our lives because they make sense. It gets at the core, to me, of what we should be as human beings who truly care about each other, and how we can learn to care. Because the functional and the operative and most meaningful words to me are the opening ones. You must help others before you think of yourselves. Help the widows and those who have little to wear and to eat and have no one to speak for them. And I can email this to Christine, and if you want it, she can email it to you to have a copy of it. It's called The Charge to a Shirt Man. And I ask you to look around at the world today, in our communities today, in this nation and in this country, in the world, and ask yourselves, how many of us are doing this? How many of our leaders, so-called, are doing this? Being truly selfless in our approach to being a good person, to being a good human being, and to in our relationship with our family and our neighbors and the people that we share this country and this planet with. So I'll leave you with that thought. Thank you.
Thank you, Joseph. And I'm going to tie that back into the whole reason why you have all joined us here, which is the truth about Thanksgiving. And I find, and I've learned through each one of you that is here. On Fridays, I do a Instagram live with Sam called Spiritual Beings Living a Human Experience. And Jackie is a former client of mine. And David showed me back to God and what it means to be spiritual and what it means to love deeply and unconditionally. And Joseph has taught me wisdom. And so in the nature of this conversation, this is Thanksgiving to me. And the way that we can really embrace the holiday in its fullness is to also accept what really happened. And to me, real love does not push away things that are hard to see, but it goes, yes, and this. Yes, and this. And that's something I've actually learned a lot from you, David, from being in, every time I say your name right now, I think of the show Schitt's Creek. Ew, David. Anyway, total side note from a show, but every time that you speak in the congregation and in the spiritual center, you talk about these things and about standing in love and about standing for. And that to me is really what Thanksgiving represents. And when I really started rumbling with the past and what I had learned as a kid, I was upset and I thought, well, but I love this holiday and I love being with family and I love being with people that I care about and showing gratitude. And before Joseph and I came on this call, a couple weeks ago, I think when we were talking about this, I was saying that to him. I said, I don't want this to be a dark conversation. And he said, well, the history of it is dark and you can still celebrate. And that's kind of where I've been the last few years, is in this space of accepting the past, but still being with the parts that I love. So very yes and. So I want to open the floor. I'm going to mute my mic and let you guys kind of join the conversation. I really appreciate you being with me in listening to Joseph. He is so much of a storyteller. I kind of like to sit back and buckle in and wish I had a cup of hot cocoa with me right now. That's just how I feel. So I'm going to let you guys have your say. And I know that Jackie has a hard stop, so feel free to jump in and it's all yours.
I'll go ahead and start if everyone's okay with that. First of all, Joseph, I really appreciate you being here and being so open about, personal stories and the history of it and being able to explain everything very simply, but also kind of turning a new perspective to some degree. I am actually adopted and I know that I have some Yaqui tribe in me and I don't know too much about it, but I want to know more. And so I was really excited to be able to come on this call and learn a little bit more about the history because I really don't know very much about it. And I can also remember being taught, I went to actually a Catholic school growing up, and I can remember those different instances and different ways that we celebrated. And I didn't really understand the full history at the time because I was so young, but I knew that there was something that was off. I knew that there wasn't, there wasn't, the full picture was not being showed very forthcomingly, right? So I just really appreciate being able to be on this call, and I've learned so much just in this last hour. Things that I need to be more consciously aware of, things that I need to pay attention to, doing the research and the behind the scene things that we don't talk about because we think maybe it's taboo or maybe it's already finished and done with and it's been completed and this is just where history stands. But I think what we sometimes forget is that there are always opportunities for new perceptions, new perspectives, and to be able to talk with people and network and connect with people that will give you that, oh, aha moment of maybe there's a different story here. Maybe there's another idea that I can, put into this, because we all have our own truths and there is one single truth, but that gets distorted when there are so many stories that go around it. So I really appreciate this opportunity, and I'm really glad that I was able to connect with all of you guys and share the energy and share the space. So thank you for allowing me to be on here and welcoming everybody into this beautiful energy that we're all sharing together. So thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so we look like we have Jackie. She's going to be signing off soon. Does anybody else want to jump in?
I would like to know, before you head out, I know you have 1 minute, Jackie. So what is something that you'll take away from the call that I think I realize from our call that it's less of a conversation and more of listening to stories. So I will be more clear about that in the future. But I'm curious what insights you had and what you'll take away from our space together.
Well, I'm taking away a lot, and I mean, I think more than, yeah, I don't know where to start with what I'm taking away, because I feel like that's really in my body, so to speak. But I'm wondering, and I know I have to jump off in literally 5 seconds, but I'm wondering, where does a second grade teacher with who might not know where to begin and has a standard curriculum in front of her that you were referring to, Joseph, where does he, she, or they start with, a group of maybe 28-year-olds, 9-year-olds in front of them?
Yeah, that's a dilemma. It can be, but there's I hate to say it, but there's information on the internet, and I found this article on the internet, and I checked it out, and so those kinds of perspectives are available. So that's the place to go. One of the places to go.
I'd also like to jump in on that because I formerly taught as a school teacher as well. I worked with kids from preschool to 8th grade. And I did that for 4 years before I jumped into my astrology practice. So I think that, it's really, I think there's a lot of aspects and components to it, depending on the school that you teach at, whether it's public or private, and things that you have to follow because it's part of the curriculum. But I was lucky enough to be able to do my last year of teaching in Hawaii, and it was a private school, but it was very hippy dippy. It was very creative. And so we were really able to just take whatever topics were given to us and run with it. And I think that, it's when you have that freedom and that creativity to just run and flow with, you can be able to come up with different creative strategies or different creative stories to be able to share with children that are an appropriate age level that do speak to that truth. And I think that when they get into those older grades, you're able to be a little bit more forthcoming with some of the details, and maybe even asking those open-ended questions of, what are you feeling about this? How does this make you feel, living in the society that we do today? So I think that there are multiple approaches to that, but I just wanted to put in my 2 cents there because that was something that I had a roadblock with too, and had to figure out how to get through it. Yeah.
Sure. Excellent points. Yes. It all depends on the curriculum that is set down by a particular school district and how restrictive they are about it as well. Some schools won't let you teach anything but what's in front, what they've deemed, which is unfortunate.
So I guess my next, sorry, go ahead, Christina.
No,
so my next question was then, how do you bring this conscious awareness, and how do you bring attention to this, the realness and the authenticity of this topic and this history? How do you bring that into the school system when it's been so ingrained for such a long time? Where does one start with that?
Right. It's at some point somebody's got to take the plunge, and it's usually some courageous teacher who is going to swim upstream and say, "Hey, what about the real story?" It's taking a risk, sometimes to the point of risking your job if you want to go against the mainstream school board who have dug their heels in sometimes and say, no, we're going to teach our curriculum and nothing more, nothing less. So it has to start with somebody being able to take a risk, and that's the unfortunate reality of how things change sometimes. But that's what it is.
Absolutely. And Christina and I mentioned too on Friday, we did our live and she mentioned something about when you're standing in your truth, you have to be able to stand there alone. And I forget how I tagged off of that, but we talked about the different perceptions that come with it all. I know, David, you have to skedaddle. So if you want to add anything, I'll just go ahead and stop, or nope, you're good. Okay. But yeah, it's, and we also talked about, leadership and what that means. And sometimes as a leader, most often, when you're leading to a different area of life, or you're doing something differently, you're doing things that have never yet been done before. And so that can freak people out. And so it's really, again, about being able to stand in your truth, being able to stand alone and say, this is important to me and I stand by it. And then being able to attract that tribe that asks how they can help you move forward.
Right. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Christina and Joseph. This has been awful. This has been wonderful. This has been awesome. Super awesome.
Thank you.
I'm glad that you got value from it, Sam. I know our other people had commitments right at the top of the hour, so they had to run.
Absolutely.
But I ran a small school for 3 years that I did business development for, and ran the office and worked with the kids. And I was telling Joseph before we came on that I would not just me, but the whole staff, all the month of November, we did a lot of Native history and indigenous history and things like that to offset. And we had certain curriculums we had to follow, but that
Mhm.
wasn't in particular one of them. And because we were what's called a non-public school, so it wasn't a public school, but it wasn't a private school. It was kind of this in between. We had a
Okay.
little more loose restrictions on how we had to deliver the material.
Mhm.
And we were a special needs school, high functioning, but still. So it absolutely can be risky to teach outside of the model that
Right.
was created. And I have my own, I could have a whole conversation on education as a whole, because education was built for creating a workforce, not necessarily
Right.
building wisdom and knowledge.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
Exactly.
So I appreciate you being here, Sam, and the people that were here. And Joseph, thank you again for sharing your
Thank you.
perspective on the holiday, and happy upcoming week of gratitude and what we choose to make it represent while still acknowledging what has happened and what has been.
Right. Of course.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, both of you. This has been awesome.
Yeah.
Very, very cool.
You're
Thank you.
welcome.
Thank
Joseph,
you as well.
is there one thing you would like to leave with the people that were here in the audience that watches in the future that is one takeaway?
There's always another side to the story.
Hmm,
I believe that as well.
absolutely. Thank you so much. You guys have a fabulous rest of your day, and happy
You too.
Thanksgiving.
You too.
Thank you so
Thank
much,
you.
Joseph. Thank you, Christina.
You bet.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.